On today's World Insight, China's economy showing resilience, what the latest Chinese industrial indicators tell us, and a ringside view of China's growth for decades. In the words of an old China hand, Swiss magnate Yuli Sig.
The thought would provide me another access to Chinese reality.
Here's our host, Tian Wei.
Hello and welcome to World Insight, coming to you live on CGTN from Beijing. We begin with today's show at China's economy based on National Bureau of Statistics data released on Friday. The profits of China's industrial companies grew in November, the fastest pace in 8 months. It broke a 3-month declining streak. What does it mean for China's economy? Before we get down to a discussion, take a look at these numbers.
Profitability at Chinese industrial enterprises improved significantly in November. The latest figures have given economists cause for optimism about China's prospects for next year. Data from the National Bureau of Statistics show that China's industrial profits rose 5.4% from a year earlier to 593.9 billion yuan in November. That's steep compared with a 9.9% drop in October. What's noteworthy is that private firms and small enterprises outperformed the whole sector. Their profit growth rates stood at 14.7% and 8.6% year-on-year, respectively. The expansion was mostly due to quickening production and sales, while factory gate prices contracted at a slower pace, said Tu Hong, a Statistics Bureau official, through a statement released alongside the data. Industrial production rose at the fastest clip in 5 months in November amid easing trade tensions with Washington. China and the United States cooled their 17-month-long trade war earlier this month, announcing a Phase 1 agreement that would cut some U.S. tariffs in exchange for more Chinese purchases of American farm products. Chinese President Xi Jinping and U.S. President Donald Trump spoke on the phone last Friday, with a confirmed deal in the pipeline. Analysts say the surge in industrial profit growth could be short-lived due to strong growth headwinds and a high degree of uncertainty that still surrounds trade relations between China and the U.S.
For more on the Chinese economy, we're joined in Hong Kong by Everett Xie, who is the chairman and CEO of Gaofeng Advisory Company. In New York, we invited Max Wolf, managing partner of Multivariate, and also in our Beijing studio, Liu Baocheng, dean from the Center for International Business Ethics from University of International Business and Economics. Gentlemen, welcome to the program. So, looking at the numbers, Professor Liu, very briefly first, what do you make of them?
Well, these numbers tells a mixed story. On one hand, there are positive impetus. We have a 5-month high of the industrial added value, and the infrastructure is on the rise. Except the real estate, the manufacture is also on a climbing side. But business confidence needs time to be really rehabilitated. And now that, with the prospect of further easing, and 1 trillion is already declared for local governments for infrastructure. So, and also, with the stabilization of the China-U.S. trade war by the Phase 1 in the pipeline, I think the business confidence is now beginning to shore up.
I see. Mr. Xie, Professor Liu mentioned a whole mixture of many signs. How should we read out of all of these numbers and also possibilities? Your take.
Yeah, my take is that this reflects a renewal of confidence by the businesses, in particular by the private sector businesses. I think the settlement of the Phase 1 of the U.S.-China trade discussion really helped to clarify a lot of the uncertainties. And the demand side from the consumers have rejuvenated quite a bit. And therefore, I think it has created this upsurge in the profits from the Chinese companies.
Well, the certainty, Mr. Xie, if I could, very briefly from you, going to be long-lived, or is it very temporary, as this is only the phase one, as we discussed?
Well, certainty is a function of external conditions, in particular the relationship between China and the U.S., but also in the global sort of economic climate. For now, this is, pretty short-lived. For next year, it's unsure whether or not this uncertainty or certainty will continue to prevail, but we'll see.
Mr. Wolf, well, China's numbers are coming out to a certain extent. We also see numbers coming from Washington as well about the U.S. economy. So what do you make of the two economies trying to survive and thrive out of these trade war, quote unquote? Mr. Wolf.
Yes, so it's always great to be here. Thanks for having me. I think the U.S. and the China economic scenarios have some shared issues as well as some very different issues. In the U.S., we're seeing massive consistent stimulus from the government. So massive fiscal stimulus. The Trump administration will have deficits spent about $1 trillion in 2019 in order to get about $400 billion in growth. So we have the twin problems of a huge fiscal stimulus, really aggressive spending, never really seen before outside of a recession. At the same time as we've cut taxes, so the deficit's huge, and we've also been keeping the interest rates incredibly low. So we are stimulating the economy massively. I think the president has some issues, some sort of heavy burden on his back, which is affecting economic policymaking. It's ideally, it shouldn't be, but it is, and that's, he's in the process of an impeachment right now, and we know there's a big election coming in a little bit less than 10 months, basically, a little bit more than 10 months now, so it's all going to be about that. The president needed a deal, and so we got at least a deal announced. We haven't seen all the detail yet, and I think it's very hard to believe that the deal can be permanent, although I'd love to see that, just because the sticking point to a lot of the trade issues has been about the conduct and public's utterances of the president, and I'm not sure his personality is as easy to change as a trade agreement is to reach.
But what about China's case from your reading?
Yeah, so it looks to me like the Chinese case is really framed by a few things going on. One is the world economy is at a rapid period of change and volatility, both politically and economically. China has largely sidestepped the political volatility, but the economic volatility is certainly there, and I think what you're seeing is an adjustment of a Chinese economy to a greater inward focus, and that's never without some bumps in the road, some difficulties, and a system of trading partners that's shifting because there's beginning to be a sort of free trade world and a not free trade world, and the people who once led the free trade world are slipping into the not so free trade world, and so the players are changing the roles they want to play in the drama. I think what you're seeing in China is a little bit of a natural economic recovery that's hitting at around the same time as the stimulus.
Right.
So again, looks pretty good in the mid to short term, harder to see beyond that right now.
Very interesting what you have just said, Mr. Wolf, because we have seen both China and the United States, the earlier so-called invisible hands are becoming ever more visible as a result of government efforts in order to encourage the growth of economy. Professor Liu, what do you make of that interesting phenomenon?
Well, I think now China is really shifting between two hands in terms of the proportion. And right now, we do notice a positive sign that the government is trying to give more of the say for the invisible hands now, particularly identified by the 28 principles, which has been recently published to provide the private businesses in a sort of equal level playing field with foreign business and SOEs, and reform is still going on. So I think now we really want the benefit of both ends, but sometimes if you do not really walk a fine line, and the pendulum can really shift, which will not really bring to the best outcome.
Okay, Mr. Xie, your take on that, and also with the question that there seems to be a mixture, once again, of policies. First of all, there is the 28, as Professor Liu just mentioned, and also there's opening up as well further to the outside world. Import certainly have been increasing tremendously, even though China's import from the U.S. has been going down, but from the rest of the world have been going up, and therefore the whole total volume going up as well. So, Mr. Xie, how do you see all of this are contributing to the real realities of Chinese economy and potentially in the near future?
Well, the Chinese government have always played a pretty visible hand, as you know, throughout the years. And in almost all cases, it's been pretty effective in directing the direction of the country. What's unique about China is that it's not only about the government's visible hand, but also it has a thriving entrepreneurial class. The private sector is expanding, and it's very active, and it's been a major source of job creation. I think this model that the Chinese has developed is really a major source of resilience of economic growth. The development of the relationship with the U.S., in particular with the U.S. And China trade war or trade dispute, have really accelerated China's reform in the process of market access, and also creating more opportunities for private sector businesses to compete with the state-owned enterprises businesses. In my view, competition is good, and I think China is going in the right direction, perhaps also with the right speed. Opening up is always good. It's going to create some challenges for some of the weaker companies who may be sort of loose along the side. But overall speaking, it's going to improve the productivity and the efficiency of the whole system. I think this is the right direction.
Of course, China is also at the same time, Professor Liu, trying to restructure its economy, try to rely more on domestic consumption rather than exports, which were the case earlier, which also create some kind of controversy between China and some of the other countries, U.S. included. But the question really is whether the domestic consumption will be really strong to meet the leftover part that has been created as a result of trade disputes. And also at the same time, whether real jobs can be created as a result of so-called consumption-driven economy.
A brief reflection of the Chinese model, I should say that the past success may not really be the sure recipe for the future success, because when Chinese economy is getting more and more sophisticated and more intertwined with the rest of the world, so I think to let the market to play a more important role instead of government rigid command is more important. As for the consumption, yes, we do see a good picture. The consumption takes more than 60% of the GDP, but in the meantime, given China's vast population and also uneven development, so manufacture is still the key. So for quite a while, manufacture has been ignored. We are trying to use the formula of the developed world to measure Chinese economic quality, and now I think the government and also business circles have realized that real economy is the sure thing. So because without the right quality, without the sizable employment that can be provided by the manufacturing sector, only relying boys running on the scooters to deliver food, simply relying on deck mass creation, it does not really provide good quality and good prospect to Chinese economy.
Well, that is part of the economy, but it's not whole economy,
That's right.
Of course. Manufacturing is still important. To the U.S., manufacturing is also important, that at least according to the current Washington and the current White House, Professor Wolf. As a result of this, how do you see this new lineup of global manufacturing chain in a way? And how is that likely to be interacting with the global value chain, global supply chain changes? Will China and the U.S. More in competition about those areas?
Yeah, so I think the U.S. administration and U.S. politically is obsessed with the idea of manufacturing, largely because it conjures up images and moves people's hearts possibly more than their heads, in terms of thinking of a day where we had a vast middle class. And talking about manufacturing is kind of the way the American political right engages a vast majority of less economically well-paid middle-class voters and wins elections. And there's been a sort of unfortunate and incorrect factually effort to associate losses in manufacturing in the U.S. with international trade. So manufacturing is still important to the U.S. It actually, the amount of value we produce each year in manufacturing, unlike in some states, has not actually gone down across the past many decades. What has happened, though, is a lot of mechanization and a lot of change in what we manufacture and how we manufacture it, and that has taken the employment base much, much, much lower and shifted who does work, by the way. You have a lot of college-educated engineers as opposed to as many people performing rote or repetitious and physical labor, so it's changed a bit. But I think the United States wants to be an advanced manufacturer. We always were. We need to be. I don't think that changes that much, but I think China is manufacturing to manufacture its future. America is manufacturing to try to get back to its past in some cases. And clearly aiming and evolving toward the future is a more viable long-term industrial policy than announcing the sort of second chance to live in the past. That usually doesn't end all that well.
We'll see how it turns out. But Mr. Xie, if you look at China-U.S. relations, which is a big factor impacting at least the psychology of the world economy, and certainly the two economies, China and U.S. as well, is that there is an extreme danger of the so-called the new Cold War, also the extreme danger of the decoupling, technologically speaking, as well as, in financial and economic terms, so-called the currency wars and other trade wars. So how do you see all of these mixtures of things and its possibility have on China's economy? How much do you think China will be able to, under the current circumstances, strengthen its own economy from within in order to, brave the storm, as they say, if there were further storms to come?
Yeah, my guess is that there will be further storms to come, unfortunately, for next year. But how and when, I cannot precisely predict, but I think one can presume there will be additional uncertainty and volatility in place. I think this is very important for the Chinese policymakers to make sure that there will be hedges against this kind of uncertainty and volatility. One is to continue to really work with the domestic economy and try to drum up the consumption side and the investment side to make sure that there's enough demand for businesses. The other is, of course, the world is a large world. It's not, America is very strong, but the world is not only about America. There are many other countries in the world. I think in the process, China has been increasing its trade ties with many other parts of the world, and I could imagine that China will continue to do that next year.
Professor Liu, do you think that will be the way out? You see the Chinese leaders very active in the recent China, Japan, and South Korea interactions over the past few days. You also see Chinese leaders as well as business delegations really active in Europe as well as other parts of developing countries as well. So Belt and Road, another thing, of course. Professor Liu, will that be able to make up to the uncertainty, as Mr. Xie just pointed out?
I think much of the homework is still at home because China has a vast economy, and now how to adjust to the state versus the market is still a big homework that we really need to streamline. So with a strong and unified economy, and when market players are getting more robust, and the rest of the job for global expansion and global responsibility will be an easier task.
Yeah.
And the fact that the China-U.S. is able to sign the Phase 1 shows that actually there are a lot of...
We are still waiting
for
the signing of the Phase 1. There is the announcement of the so-called agreement.
At least there has been agreement in the pipeline.
Yeah.
So it shows that the homework is still how to allow market players to play on an equal footing, and how to introduce the rule of law, and how to dismantle a lot of hidden barriers, both with the global community and within China itself, and it's still something that is really the ultimate solution instead of looking at all those technical areas.
Before we go, one final question for you, Professor Liu. Jobs, jobs, jobs. That's going to be the key. That's going to be the key to everything, to economy, to stability, to a lot of things. So jobs next year?
Yes. I think now the government has realized that only by promoting mobility of people from different spaces, so that they can really look for the best fit of the skill versus job is important. So the recent release of the policy is very welcome. And the other is how we can really retrain those people who can really be upgraded over their skill sets for new job opportunities. So that's also quite a challenge.
I see. Professor Wolf, from your perspective, how do you see that issue also? Jobs, jobs, jobs.
Jobs is huge. In the United States, I think our story might be a tiny bit different only because it's wages, wages, wages. So we've had a tight labor market in the U.S., which looks good and is good, but we've had wage stagnation. And we've also had whole blocks of the economy here migrate from the traditional employment, which our numbers are good at capturing, to become independent contractors and on this gig economy that we have. And we still don't know how that works, but I think if you re-envision sort of including that in the numbers don't look as good. But I think in the U.S. it might be wages, 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 because we tend to do well when people spend more, and if they spend more without the wages, we saw what happens eventually with that model in 2008.
I see. Mr. Xie, final words from you. Jobs? Jobs or wages?
Yeah, it's very critical, of course, to create jobs. I think for China, it has already done a pretty good job over the last several years on innovation, and as you know, innovation enhances productivity and also create jobs. In my view, that trend will continue to go on, albeit could be a bit challenging in some of the sectors. But the private sector businesses are very innovative in China, and I believe that they will be a major source of job creation for China for next year.
Even though we have been hearing some latest stories related to the private sector also trying to make it happen, we'll see how things will evolve from here. For now, I want to thank the three of you for joining us. Edward Xie, Max Wolf, last but not least, Liu Baocheng. Really appreciate it, gentlemen. Thank you so much. You're watching World Insight, coming to you live from Beijing, still to come on our program.